All right. Well, we will give it just a second to see if people are popping in here before we get started. I want to give a chance for if people are going to jump in on LinkedIn or elsewhere for them to do so. So thank you, Maldina and Dana, for joining us. We're having trouble posting to LinkedIn. Let's wait 30 to 60 seconds. If it doesn't work, we have to end it and start a new one.
Or just remove this destination from the broadcast. Okay. I think we might be live. I think we're good.
Yeah, it looks like it just popped up. So we'll give it a second for people to jump on. We had about 50 people register, so that's exciting. So we'll see. Give it another minute or two, and then we can jump into the content because we'll definitely let people get to see this content after the fact. I know I check in a lot to future recordings of LinkedIn Live events and things like that to get the tidbits and the experience and the stories and everything. And I think this has popped up on Facebook too, but we'll see. I know we had to change this multiple times.
Yes, we are live in all three places. I just double checked.
Okay.
Yeah. I love when technology just works well.
I wish I had a designated like one person to jump in to just like make sure that it was, working correctly, but we shall see. I probably should have sent out a reminder, but that's okay. All right. Well, should we jump into some of the content so we can start? You know what? Mine is only showing on Facebook and YouTube.
I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay. And
also,
it's showing on that.
Yep.
I just
LinkedIn, we're good.
Okay.
We're good.
Fantastic. All right.
On Facebook, I saw her, so we're good.
So let's jump in and we'll see if anyone is able to we'll see if anyone's, I'm not sure if how the comments and everything will work. So maybe Maldini, you can also just keep an eye on LinkedIn if there's things that pop up in those comments and just make sure they're coming through. So I want to, I'm going to go ahead and get this. Or Maldini, are you going to present or you want me to present?
I'm good either way if you want me to. Might be easier for you just so that way you can click through slides.
Okay.
Unlocking Peak Performance Overview, the journey to peak performance.
No, that's not the right one. All right. I swear we're normally so much more with it than we are this week. And I will take total responsibility for that because I was in the hospital last week, ironically, for 4 days. And those are some of the gifts of having been through burnout and what happens when we go through burnout and what the long-term, kind of consequences of doing that truly are. So the topic of this, and maybe just to get started for a second and introduce everybody, I'm Jessica Tejan. I've been in the corporate space for over a decade until I experienced my own burnout, which I only recently discovered was actually burnout. I didn't really appreciate what happened to me about a year ago, a little over a year ago, and what that created in both my body and in my life at the time. And so I wanted to share some of the insights that I've gleaned as a result of that. But I now own a business called Evolving to Exceptional. Our business is really focused on how to help people live their best lives. And so what better way to maybe talk about doing that than addressing the challenges that exist right now with burnout. Dana, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dana Parker, and I have been in the life coaching, personal development world for over 13 years, and I'm here in support of Jessica, Evolving to Exceptional, Meldina, and a part of this beautiful company and business in the arena of our new program that we'll touch on today called Evolving Female Leaders. So I'm really excited to be here. I love being with Meldina and Jessica, and I always feel an honor to be a part. So thank you for having me.
Meldina, how about you?
Yeah, I am Maldina Ali Basic. I am the Director of Performance Management at Evolving to Exceptional. I've worked with Jessica, which I can't believe, but it's already been a little over 5 years now. So I've worked pretty closely with her and I've kind of been through all the challenges that she's had and the experience that she has when it comes to burnout. So I'm just really excited to be here and get to share some of my tidbits as well and what I've witnessed throughout my career and working closely with Jessica. So really excited to be here and to talk about this topic.
Yeah, so kind of diving right in, am I stressed or is it burnout? What is the difference between the two things? And I think this is, for me, something I kind of knew was going on in the background. There's tons of articles out there talking about burnout, and especially in the healthcare industries, and the technology industries where burnout's just running rampant. But I didn't necessarily think about it for myself so much until I picked up Jennifer Moss's book, The Burnout Epidemic, which was fantastic, a great read. And as I was reading it and I got to the description of what burnout looks like, I suddenly realized that that's exactly what I had gone through. And I think sometimes what we do is we think about burnout as something else, something that impacts other people or that's kind of going on in the background, but not necessarily understanding how that might be impacting us, especially for all the HR professionals out there. Burnout is particularly rampant right now in our space. And I think that that's a big part of my background. And I think that, that we don't always take the time. We're so busy focused on employees. We don't always take the time to consider whether we're in fact also in burnout or what's going on with us internally. And so I think, what I hope you take away from today is the practical applications of what it looks like, what we can maybe do about it, and what you can do about it if you're already in it. And that's probably the hardest part, is if you're already in burnout, what it means and what it takes to kind of come out and come back from that. So if we get into just to start, what is burnout? How do we know how to identify it? What does it look like? And I think that one of the things that we often think, or the way I've always thought it looked like, was something like this, was like a complete meltdown, non-functional, zoned out, mode. And so when I was in burnout, I didn't look like this. I still got ready every day. I was still going to work. I was still doing all of my things. I didn't look like I was having a complete meltdown. And I think for a lot of people, that's true, because what burnout isn't is some big explosion. Burnout is not a quick, all of a sudden everything implodes, everything's, you've completely gone from functional to non-functional. Instead, burnout is really a slow burn. It adds up slowly. It starts as that spark, and that fire gets bigger and bigger until the whole forest is on fire. And in her book, Jennifer talks about pebbles to boulders, that burnout is like these little pebbles that we pick up, and over time they become these heavy boulders that we're carrying. And it's that impact, it's that result that is causing I think what gets people confused is not seeing not seeing that this applies to that this isn't quick, that it isn't a one-time, type of situation that occurs. How about you guys? Have you guys seen that, Dana and Meldina?
Yeah, I definitely think that what can happen in situations like this is things start to build internally. A little bit of stress turns into, daily stress, which then turns into the whole week is stressful, which then turns into, when you're at that like pushing point where one thing can tip you over and then something in life happens and it just completely pushes you over the edge, to me, those things can go, the little things can go unnoticed, but then the big thing in life shows us the reality and the truth. The big thing that can happen shows us that, pushes us over and shows us, oh, I'm not caring for myself. I'm not taking good care of myself. And that can go unnoticed, especially for women, because we're so used to giving to everyone around us, and everyone's needs are really important to us. And a lot of times more important than our own needs. So I see it particularly a lot in women.
Yeah, and then you've got the added challenge, of course, for women of childbirth, pregnancy, and children, right? So not that men don't have the children, but they don't have the pregnancy and childbirth necessarily. So this is the definition, actually, that I read in Jennifer Moss's book that just struck me so much. So what is burnout? Burnout is actually not like a medical condition, although it has health impacts. It's actually this is the World Health Organization definition, is that it's a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So that means, chronic in and of itself means it has to have existed for an extended period of time. It has to have continued to progress over time. And then it's categorized by these three things: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficacy. So that means like not feeling like you're productive or as accomplished or as effective, like you're just not as energized and into the work that you're doing. And for me, as I was going through my burnout, again, that I only now recognize as burnout, I didn't at the time. I went from loving my team and having such energy and excitement to just feeling defeated, like I couldn't move things forward. And I think a way to think about this is to really distinguish the differences between stress and burnout. And so when we think of stress versus burnout, they're very different responses. Stress is characterized by overengagement. Burnout is characterized by disengagement. So when we're stressed, stress can either be positive or negative. Now, chronic stress is never healthy. But when we're stressed, there is some degree of healthy stress that allows us to get energized to get that that endorphin rush, so that we can put in the effort that we need to accomplish the results we're trying to achieve. Burnout, on the other hand, is more of disengagement. It's giving up. It's dropping out of that state. When we're stressed, our emotions are actually overreactive. Whereas when we're in burnout, that they're blunted, they're kind of muted. We don't feel them as much. We're just kind of in that more neutral mode. Stress produces urgency and hyperactivity, so it gets you moving, gets you getting things done. Whereas burnout produces helplessness and hopelessness. So if you're feeling that like helplessness or like nothing's going to change, I can't make a difference, that's burnout. Stress causes a loss of energy. Burnout causes a loss of motivation, ideals, and hope. So when we get into burnout, we're no longer hopeful that we can achieve it, or that we can overcome the issues, or that we can address challenges. We've kind of dropped out of that energy source. Stress leads to anxiety disorders, whereas burnout leads to detachment and depression. It really pushes you down into that I don't care mentality. Stress is their primary damage is physical, whereas burnout, the primary damage is emotional. So it's really impacting you at an emotional level, on our beliefs and at a beliefs and behaviors part of our existence, rather than necessarily the physical, although there are physical elements, because it's the chronic stress that gets us to burnout. Stress may kill you prematurely. Burnout may make life seem like it's not worth living. Burnout may push you to the point of, I just can't do this anymore. It's too much. It's too much to try to accomplish. It's too much to do. So what's happening when we're getting, that's getting us into this burnout mode? What's happening with this stress? So I like to talk about our nervous systems here. And I think what's happening in our workplaces in particular is that we are in a constant state of incoherence. And the chart on the right of that slide is the incoherence. And it's where we're bouncing from our sympathetic to our parasympathetic nervous system up and down. So our sympathetic, which is up in the chart, is our fight, flight, freeze response. It is our high stress, there's danger, I need to react, I need to respond. Now, not necessarily in the current environment, that can be anything. That can be, we can get into sympathetic just because our kids are crying, or we're trying to get food on the table, or, there's a tight deadline coming up and we're stressed about hitting that deadline. It doesn't necessarily have to be an actual catastrophic or life-threatening incident to put you up into sympathetic. Now, parasympathetic, which is the down, is the opposite of that. So that's when we drop into rest. They call it rest and digest, right? It's when we drop into this state of recovery from being in sympathetic. And I think what happens is in a lot of workplaces, we've been in sympathetic dominance. So we've been in this state where we're just in this constant heightened nervous system, in this constant fight, flight, freeze. And then we maybe crash. And for me, this was definitely the case. I think I spent 4 years in sympathetic dominance, mostly always stressed in the workplace, coming home, crashing, in order to just sustain my life in that way. And I think what we're seeing in our workplaces is, instead of being in a coherent state where we're helping people move from a certain degree of stress to balance, back to stress to balance, we're moving up and down between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Instead, we're on the right side. We're super incoherent. There is no consistency. And what that means is it's impacting negatively everyone's performance. So that actually is creating more stress, more work, more ineffectiveness, more inefficiencies in our workplaces, because we're not in our optimal performance, which is when our nervous system is in coherence. And so I think this is a key part of burnout that comes into play when we're thinking about what's going on or what's leading to this burnout in our workplaces. There's a couple signs, that to look for if you think you might be in burnout or you might have employees in burnout. Some of the initial signs are that there's health issues. So you might be experiencing fatigue and exhaustion, sleep deprivation, which actually then lowers your immunity to illness, creates foggy thinking and trouble concentrating. There are also emotional issues. So you have this detachment from your previous involvements. You feel unappreciated. There's a hopelessness or that depressed outlook, a loss of meaning. You're maybe more moody, impatient, short-tempered. These are the things that we see in terms of emotional issues. And then it impacts our jobs. So we have higher job absenteeism and inefficiency. Our loss of motivation causes us to have an inability to actually meet the obligations we've said we would meet. And we start to withdraw from our coworkers and from social situations. And so these are kind of like the red flags of burnout. These are the things that, when you see them either in yourself or people, are key signs that someone may be in a burnout scenario, not just a high stress scenario. And they're the things to be looking for. So if that is what burnout is, if that gives us an understanding of what it is, then what causes it? What creates this burnout? And we talked a little bit, about the nervous system and our coherence and what's happening there. But I like to think of this as that there's really 3 contributing factors to burnout. And I like to use analogies a lot. So I'm going to use the analogy of a fire. And what causes burnout, if you think about a fire, there's 3 things. It takes 3 things to start a fire. And we need all 3 of those things in order for a fire to start. So the first is you need oxygen. You need that environment or the air. The second is you need fuel. You need logs, sticks, the things that are going to burn. And then you need a heat source. You need a spark or a flame. And these are the 3 things that we need when in order to create burnout. These are the 3 things that lead to burnout. So when we think about these, I'm going to go through them one by one and what it kind of looks like in terms of the workplace and ourselves. So the oxygen is like our workplace environment or the culture. And so when we have cultures that have excessively high workloads, a lot of micromanagement, a lack of recognition, poor communication, collaboration, and conflict resolution, unfair work practices and discrimination, our values mismatched. These are the cultures that then create the environment or the set of circumstances that make a fire possible, that make it ripe for burnout to begin. So what is exactly is burning then? What is the fuel for burnout? So the fuel is our unproductive beliefs. It is us as individuals and the things, our beliefs or behaviors we've internalized as individuals that lead us to push beyond the point of reason. So things like neuroticism, perfectionism, introversion, need for validation, high achievement needs, imposter syndrome. These are different elements, and this isn't a comprehensive list, but these are different things inside of us that cause us to push beyond the breaking point, that cause us to go from where we should say stop, I need a break, I need to stop, but it causes us to keep going because we need other people to validate that we're doing a good job. So we have to keep working, we have to keep pushing, we have to get the project done. We can't drop the ball because we have this belief we need to be perfect. And it's these internalized elements about ourselves that create the fuel that allow the fire to burn. But in order to have a fire, you have to have a spark. So what is that heat source? What is that spark or that heat source? It's any major challenge or crisis. So any, a global pandemic, which we all just went through, death of a loved one, serious illness, child issues, divorce, pregnancy. These are all examples of major challenges or crises that happen in our lives that cause that spark, that cause the little bit extra that starts the fire to burn, and it might just start as the smallest flicker and the smallest little flame, and then slowly grow over time, which is exactly what happened to me. So I've got a little bit about my story to give you my burnout story, which I think actually goes back 5 years. I think it was 5 years in the making of really challenging, hard things that were adding up or creating that slow burn for me. So, for me, I was managing multiple departments. I had a baby back in 2016. That was my first child. I was sitting on the leadership team. I was managing our IT department. I was managing talent management, legal, and marketing at the time. Then I had a serious health crisis in 2017. I sold my and my business sold a part of its business at the time as well. And so I went through, being hospitalized. I had an anaphylactic reaction. I was extremely ill, developed multiple autoimmune conditions while I was trying to sell part of our business. And then we acquired another business at the exact same time. So I was selling and acquiring a business and had multiple miscarriages, all in the middle of what was going on. Fast forward to 2019. So a few months later, I am pregnant with twins. And I go through a twin pregnancy, which is not an easy pregnancy. There's a lot of doctor's visits, a lot of testing and things required. And we were transitioning our business to an ESOP, which is basically like selling the business again. So we were selling our whole company to an employee stock ownership program business. Then at the end of 2019, we transitioned the leadership of that business. So the president retired and a new president took over. And at the same time, my twins, who were born now, were diagnosed with a food protein intolerance, which meant they couldn't take formula. So I had to continue to nurse, pump, get donated breast milk in order to feed my babies. And so I was just getting back into the office at the beginning of 2020. I was pumping during trainings, trying to keep it all together. And then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And as an attorney, so I was responsible for legal. I was the head of our talent management department, and I was responsible for our IT department. There were a lot of things we had to work on in all three areas as we transitioned, from in office to out of office. And at the same time, I added two new departments. I added order management and project coordination to and customer service to my set of responsibilities. So I added these additional teams and responsibilities at the same time that the pandemic was starting. And I had two of my employees who were managers on maternity leave at the same time. So it was a lot. And I had 9-month-old twins. I had a 3-year-old boy. And that was when the pandemic was starting and we all had childcare challenges. My kids were at home. We were trying to figure out how to watch 3 kids. My husband works, as do I. And by the end of the year, our company went through a workforce reduction, which is incredibly stressful and challenging when you're trying to determine how many people to reduce and how to go through that process. And so that was my 2020 alone was enough to maybe put someone into burnout. We go into 2021, and in the spring of 2021, our business was hit by a ransomware attack. So our entire business infrastructure was taken down. We had to we were negotiating with the threat actors. We were trying to conduct business, bring our systems back up. It was incredibly stressful and challenging. And at the same time, there were some internal business issues and dynamics, including relationship challenges that I had with people internally that just took me over the edge, took me to that point where you just lose hope. And so it's really, looking back when I tell my story, not so much a surprise that I ended up in burnout, but when I was in it in the moment, I had no idea that that was what burnout looked like. I had no idea that that was what was happening or what was going on. And when I started to read Jennifer Moss's book about the burnout triggers, the list was just so perfect. It was exactly what I had been through. And so the list of burnout triggers are excessive workload, a perceived lack of control. So it doesn't actually have to be a lack of control. It could just be perceived. A lack of reward or recognition, poor relationships, lack of fairness, and a values mismatch. And when I read through that list a couple of weeks ago, I went check, 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 check. Like I had each of those elements. And so I think what's really helpful about this list is for individual performers to walk through it and understand whether they're experiencing any of these. And if they're experiencing any or all of them, especially if they're experiencing all of them, what impact that may be having on them, even if they don't necessarily see it or realize it at the surface level. Does that list surprise either of you, Meldina and Dana? What do you guys think of this list?
For me personally, I mean, I think most of these are kind of no-brainers, right? Like you've got an excessive workload. That lack of control is the one that hits home for me. I think for coming from a background where I'm a pretty perfectionist, so I like things in order, and when I perceive not even that I'm actually going through it or that control is being taken away from me, but whenever I see that I perceive that I'm losing that control, it triggers so much. It's kind of like you mentioned that over time, it triggers all these other things for me too, and then I'm in that burnout mode.
Yeah, I think a lot of these things can really, for those who are maybe recovering perfectionists or heavy perfectionists, I call myself a recovering perfectionist. These things, all of these things can really add up in the brain. You know, the stories that we tell ourselves about, you know, our not enoughness or feeling out of control or those kinds of things can go, when things start building, they can go rampant in our mind. They can just go crazy. And I think, you know, add poor relationships into that. And I think for me, that's the when it gets really accentuated, because oftentimes it does take somebody to mirror back to your inner strength and your power and that you've got this, somebody to talk things out with, at least for me. And I think most people, most women in particular, we're kind of talkers and social and and we're very we oriented. But having those poor relationships on top of that is a combination for burnout for me for sure. So all of these absolutely make sense, and I can definitely see all connected to stories we tell ourselves, the stories that we weave inside our minds about things.
That values mismatch one is one I think that does surprise me a little bit because I think that's one that you don't often think about, that if your values don't align with your manager, your team or your organization, it can lead to the burnout because you're constantly chasing something that might not align with the rest of the group. And so you can see how you're kind of in that hamster wheel, just running, and run into that burnout very quickly. I feel like that's very possible.
I think
Yeah. I-
something you said, Dana, was really interesting too, as I reflect back on my own experience, which is, so as I was the only female executive leader in the organization. So my challenges were unique compared to what any of the other leaders were going through. And although I did have employees to, that I had good friendships with, and my managers that I was close with, I couldn't necessarily lean on them the same way for support or to share the depth of struggle necessarily that was going on. And when I look back, there were points where I certainly was kind of reaching out for extreme help, throwing my hand up, talking about how I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water and things like that. But I think that because so much of my challenge was not visible, especially during COVID with being at home and just being a woman, not understanding that my male colleagues not necessarily understanding what it was taking out of my body, both physically and emotionally, to be feeding two babies around the clock while working in this executive position. And I don't even think I necessarily realized how much physical impact that all of that was having, trying to do it all at the same time. So it's interesting you talk about having someone to talk to identify these things, and how, and I think for women in HR, this may also be a problem, because you're kind of separated and you don't necessarily get the same opportunities to, have a support system. So if you don't have a senior person who can support you, who knows what it's like, it can be really difficult to get that feedback you're looking for.
Yeah, and Jessica, you have such a good point. A lot of times we can just be going, and the next thing comes, and we're just trying to manage everything that's coming, that we don't take a moment, pause, and stop and reflection of, okay, what is all this internal stress coming? Where is it coming from? And I think that's why naming these kinds of things, this is so powerful. And for anyone listening and anyone that will listen to this, go through some of these things and ask yourself, like, personalize this. Ask yourself, am I experiencing these things? Don't keep it out here at a distance. Don't say, oh yeah, that's a thing, and that's what other people experience. Bring it on in. That's where impact can happen in your life. That's where you can make changes, because you can't change what you don't acknowledge.
Right.
We get to acknowledge and name these things first, and then we can start shifting things. And I think that's powerful here as listeners are listening to this, is personalize this, ask yourself, get curious, and then you can do something about it.
Yeah, and I think what we're really talking about here is if you can identify you're on the path, you can identify you're on the path to burnout, how can you take action before you get there? Which kind of leads us into the next section, which is, what do we do to prevent burnout? How do we know how to prevent it from happening in the first place? And so if we use our kind of fire analogy, any firefighter is going to tell you that it is easier to prevent a fire than it is to put one out. So we always want to put in the fire prevention efforts rather than, wait to try to put it out once it's already started. So the best thing we can do is make the changes that we need to prevent that burnout from occurring. And so if we think about the three elements we talked about, and I'm going to start with the spark, because the spark we really can't change. We can't prevent the crises that happen in our lives, the global pandemics, the deaths, the divorces, the pregnancies. Maybe you could prevent the pregnancies, but most of us want them. But those are the challenges or the things that happen in our lives that are not things we eliminate or get rid of. They're not things that we prevent from happening. What we can do something about is the environment and the fuel. And so if we start with the environment, we've got to look at our cultures, at those environments and the things that are happening within our workplaces and our communities that are leading to this extremely high level of burnout. What are the elements that are contributing to that culture or to these results that make it so easy for people to move into burnout? Because they wouldn't be burning out if the cultures weren't such that that they were conducive to burnout. And then the next thing is evolving ourselves. So how do we look at our own individual performance, at what we're doing, at how we're performing, and what are those limiting beliefs or what are those internal behaviors and beliefs that are creating fuel for that fire, that are creating those outcomes or those results? So if we start for a minute and talk about evolving our cultures, what could we do or what comes to mind, you guys, as things that we could do to evolve our cultures? Any thoughts?
I think really taking into account the balance of everyone working in the company, they're human. Humans are going to have human experiences. Emotions are always involved, whether you're in business, whatever you're in. There's always personal things and relationship things. There's lots of things that go into business. And I think having a well-rounded perspective is a really important of work and deadlines, but also taking into account the human experience and what each individual is experiencing. I also think having a safe place for people to be honest and open with what's going on in their life and what's happening, and to have a team of people that support them, even if it's not in your workplace. I think having that, like, in my life, I know when I've been through some of my hardest times, like, I make a list of people that I know I can go to, that are like my top people, and so I think it's individual changes, but also the culture change comes from individuals asking more for what they want and individuals changing within, than saying, okay, I think we need this shift in our cultures.
I absolutely agree with Dana. I think it's kind of twofold. I think both parties have to do their part. From the business standpoint, I think having the right practices and processes in place to foster a culture that prevents burnout is going to be important. And just as important is making sure that individuals know to look out for these triggers, and they have to know themselves when they're approaching that level of burnout. How can they, what they do to prevent it, but then also if they are there, how are they going to put it out? What are the things that they've got to do? I totally agree with Dana there. It's got to be kind of twofold there. Each party's got to do their own part so that we can involve our cultures overall.
Yeah, and I think I think that's interesting. I think it requires both, but I think when we focus on our cultures, um, some of I think part of it is the shift in cultural environments that we have, and a shift from maybe one parent working families to two parent working families, from having child care provided to having to access child care, and the challenges that come from all of that. And so if you have one person who's primary at home, it makes it much easier to put in an extra hour at the end of the day to get work completed. If you don't, you have that hour to go pick up your child, or they start charging you $5 a minute, right? And I'm not joking, for those of us that are parents, we know, right? And so it's a different set of challenges than necessarily what some of I think the cultural leaders maybe experienced as they rose to those positions, especially people that are later in their career that maybe experienced a different or had a different experience throughout their career. And I think when we look at look at the change in the culture, we're not just changing the culture or evolving the culture to like help the individual, although that's important. We're actually evolving it because as our individuals get sick, as they burn out, they are no longer producing the results and performing at the level that we want them to perform. And so sometimes I think there's this cycle of people have this heavy workload, they start to burn out, and then their performance dips, and now we push harder on them. And so now it gets worse, and it starts to just perpetuate itself into both parties being frustrated. How come we're not getting as much work done as we should be able to? Well, maybe you're running a team of people to, into complete burnout, lack of coherence, where they're not performing well anymore, where they're making more mistakes, where they're not as productive, as efficient, or as effective. And so, things like reward or recognition, I think oftentimes can get pushed to the side. Like people don't really need that, or it's not that important, or it's their job. But you're actually negating the effects of stronger performance by not giving that recognition, because that little bit of dopamine that we get from recognition, from feeling good, from being told that we're appreciated, that we're doing a good job, that we're, making meaningful contributions, gives the energy, balances us back into coherence of those positive emotions, those positive feelings. And so if we're not getting any of those, if we're perpetually not getting recognition, reward, we're feeling overwhelmed, we're feeling overworked, we don't have control, it just begins to push them down. And so even if a person is the most accountable, productive, effective person out there, in the right culture, it may not matter, or maybe I should say in the wrong culture. Does that make sense?
Totally. I totally agree.
So when we think about creating these cultures, that I want to think about creating cultures that promote coherence. So really using like the latest in terms of neuroscience, and knowing that when we get people into a higher level of coherence, into operating more effectively, that then we're going to see those performance results. And so balancing our workloads, I include balanced breathing in here, because just a little bit of time taking a breath can make a huge difference. Those positive emotions, giving flexibility and independence. I think that's why there's such a push today around flexibility and how people work, is because that alone gives them some energy, gives them some input, some control over their working world. Creating relationships, and not forced relationships, but natural relationships, having inclusive cultures, and then educating people on values. And I think sometimes when we think about burnout, companies will go to and Jennifer talks about this in her book, will go to the extreme of like well-being programs, or I'm going to get ping pong tables, or and those actually aren't the contributing factors to burnout. And so we need to think more about these other elements that are not about perks and benefits. I'm not saying to take benefits away, but they're not about those things. They're about what's really happening internally with your people, and what your environment is providing in terms of support to your people, or lack thereof. So the next thing we have to do is, and you guys touched on this, is evolve ourselves. So what can we be doing to evolve ourselves? And I put up there around self-awareness and reflection. And I think you said it earlier, Dana, like sometimes when you get busy, you don't take the time for that self-awareness and reflection. And I think that's really true. I think if we don't appreciate the importance for where am I right now? Am I in a productive state? Then we just tend to push ourselves through the challenges that we're experiencing, and we don't really develop the practices that we need in order to be in that higher coherence. What do you guys think?
I absolutely agree. I think self-awareness and reflection practices, in a dream world, every company would be inviting their employees into this space. I think that this is one of the most powerful spaces, especially when you enter in with what I call loving curiosity. As a recovering perfectionist, you can go into self-awareness and reflection, and it can be painful. it can be really painful to take accountability and responsibility for where you're at and your actions. And for some people, that's really hard. But if you teach this in a really powerful way of loving curiosity, being really honest with yourself, with the reality of what is, and being kind to yourself in the process, people actually find that a reward in accountability when they can be taught to do it in a powerful way. This will empower you to make better decisions, to see yourself differently, to know how to shift things. It gives you all your power back. Self-awareness and reflection gives you all of your power back in how you show up, how you feel about things, and where you're moving. And this is one of my most favorite topics to talk about, and I've seen the difference in my own life and in others' lives as I do so. But the important part is that balance of doing, accountability can be for some people really painful, like, oh, I don't want to, and so I think how we teach this and how we approach it can make a huge difference, and is actually one of the most powerful tools that we could be using.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've got the 4 keys that we use around peak performance of getting really clear on expectations, providing that feedback and motivation, which is that recognition and that rewards piece, using strengths-based development, so focus on what people do best and helping them to use that in order to keep growing their skills and abilities, and then creating a mindset of accountability, which is really personal accountability. So it's helping people learn how to take ownership over their lives and be empowered to shift and change their mindset using a variety of different techniques in order to achieve the results and the outcomes that they want to achieve in their lives. And when you do those 4 things, that's where you really see yourself operate at that peak performance. Now, I'm going to be really honest here, though, and say that I knew these 4 keys in and out very well, and I still landed myself into burnout. What I didn't have was the self-awareness and reflection practices to know what my limits were. And looking back, there was actually another employee who I worked with who did this really well, who took very good care of herself, knew her boundaries, knew when she needed to end her day, start her day. But she struggled in the culture because the culture was a push harder culture. The environment was a work longer hours, stay late means you're more committed to the job. And that's, I think, the balance of where you've got to decide of you can do all the internal work you want, but if the environment doesn't reward results, it rewards hours worked or participation or visibility, then that's gonna have a negative impact on on your progression and then lead you to burnout. And so I think that's part of that balance piece that came to mind as you were talking about that. So what if somebody's already in burnout? What do we do to address current burnout and move beyond it? So I struggled a bit with this because, and this isn't from Jennifer's book on the burnout epidemic, but from my own research. And I think there are really 3 things that when someone's really in burnout, and speaking from experience, that I think we really need most. And those 3 things are rest, love, and joy. I'm going to qualify love in a second. So rest is probably the most obvious, right? Because we're exhausted, we're burnt out. So how do we incorporate more time to replenish ourselves? And so it's getting really specific about boundaries. By the time you're in burnout, by the time you have damaged your body to that level, you are going to need to make up for the time you've lost. So you've got to start accounting for that and figuring out how you're going to recover and get the rest that you need. Now, love is like a soft term. What I mean here is love, but appreciation, recognition, something that fills you back up, that says, I matter, I'm important, I'm doing good things, my contributions are valuable, I feel like I matter in the world, I feel like I belong, I feel like people care about me. It's those pieces that people need back to fill up that disconnection, that disengagement, the breaking down of relationships. They need that piece. And then the third piece of joy is, how do I bring those feelings back into my life where I am filled with joy, where I want to work, where I want to live, where I want to see results, where I am happy and feeling the effects of that throughout my life. Because we know when we experience joy, it brings us back into that coherence, right? Those are the emotions that are going to bring us back into balance, which will allow us to achieve the results and the performance results that we want in our lives. So I'm curious what you guys think of these three things. If you think I've maybe missed something, or what you think around these.
I love these. I think that all of these have to do with your choices, where you choose to say yes and spend your time, and they all come internally. Like for you to matter, for you to that your contribution makes a difference, that your experiences of your life matter. All of those things are internal. Oftentimes we wait for others to show us that love, but really what's the most powerful, and I see this again and again and again in my coaching, especially with women. Women are so good at giving love, and it's really important that we turn that within for ourselves. We offer that love and kindness and generosity to ourselves that we give so generously to others. And so all that validation that you need, I can tell you from my own experience, needing that from everyone else and requiring that of everyone else is an exhausting game that will lead to more and more and more. It's like you're trying to fill a bucket with holes in it. And so you fill those holy places by giving yourself that validation. You know, I something simple that I did that was so good is I started, because I'm a words of affirmation girl, so I loved compliments, and I used to feel like I needed them for validation. And instead, I started shifting it. When someone would give me a compliment, I would quickly internally be like, ooh, do I think that about me? Do I want to think that about me? Yeah, okay, I like that. I received that. Thank you. And that's how I would respond to, that's how I decided to respond to validate my own self. And then throughout the week, if I really liked it, then I would repeat those things to myself in the mirror sometimes. And at first that could be awkward for some people, but it's so powerful to look yourself in the eyes and to say those things that you want other people to say. And as far as joy comes, joy is one of my most favorite words. It is a core value of mine that is just so important to me. And joy to me is gathered in present moments of happiness over time. That is the accumulation of joy. Being present is key to joy. Being present for your children's laughter, being present for those wonderful connections, being present for those moments where you get to watch the sunset or the sunrise. Those moments, you know, like this morning, I went on a bike ride and it was beautiful. I live in Utah. The mountains are incredible here. And I get to bike every morning by this river and being present in that moment, soaking up those moments that I am a human being living fully. It's those moments that I'm present for that really create a joy in life, create a joy and a wonder and a magic to life that we deserve to be more present for and really bring ourselves to that place in practice. I used to not be good at this, and it's taken practice and time. It's just like a muscle to develop. But those are some things and keys that I would say really add to these three elements that really can and do make a difference.
What about you, Meldina? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just love that these are so vague because it really lets people adapt, what rest means for them, what love means for them, what joy means to them, and how they're gonna bring that into their lives. So rest for most people means sleeping, right? But it could also mean picking up a book and laying on the couch and deep diving into that, and that brings you rest. It's whatever de-stresses you, whatever brings you that calmness. That's what we're talking about. Same thing with love, same thing with joy. I love that these are just so open-ended that anybody can apply them and look for the ways that you can incorporate more of these into your life to be able to combat that burnout. I think is really, really important.
Well, I like what you said about rest. And I would add there that, 2.5 minutes of balanced breathing. So breathing 6 counts in, 6 counts out for 2.5 minutes can last you 12 hours, can bring you 12 hours of more calm coherence. And so something as simple as that, if I were back in the workplace, that'd be the first thing I would implement is before any meeting, we just breathe for 2.5 minutes. It's so small and it can make such a big impact for what you get accomplished in that next hour or whatever time that meeting is, and bring some rest to people that are in the moment. And it's so small. So one of the things I want to comment on with these three is I think that when we get into burnout, and burnout is so intense that it's not going to be a quick recovery. I'm a year out and I was just in the hospital again, experiencing the long-term effects of what I did to my body by pushing it so hard. And so I think being aware of how do we start to incorporate these practices into daily small practices. And even if you can't find joy in the present, one of the examples I would give is to go back to a moment where you've experienced joy in the past and just imagine and relive it in your mind for a minute. It doesn't have to be for a long time, but just take 1 minute in order to bring that emotion into your heart and spread it, throughout your body. So if you're in burnout, this is my first encouragement, is to find a place that can help you manage through your burnout, whether that's a therapist, a coach, a community of support, to find a space where you can come together around those practices and feel support and encouragement as you're going through them so that you're not on your own. I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't found the communities and the coaches and the therapists, because I did all three, to help me do the recovery process that I did in the last year. Couple of next steps. One is I wrote a book about my whole experience called Fiercely Cherished Beings. It describes my journey of recovering from burnout so far. I say so far because I don't think I'm done. And it describes how the lessons that I learned to figure out how to cherish and love myself, how to not just love myself, but really take care of myself, cherish my being and who I am and how I exist and show up in the world in a way that's different. So that's one step you can take. The second is we have an Evolving Female Leaders program. It's open right now. We only have 12 spaces, but we're looking for 12 fantastic women leaders who want to get this extra level of support. So it's not just burnout, it's everything to do with leadership. It's for an entire year, although you can sign up for just the first 6 months. It's very intense in order to provide the growth and development. And I literally built it around what I didn't get in the workplace as a senior executive female leader, what I felt I needed but couldn't get within my workplace. So we've got that program. And then we're also going to be doing our Evolving Ourselves in Our Workplaces program. And this is going to be based on something called MBIT, which is multiple brain integration techniques. And what we're going to be doing is using this neurological science-based approach to how to integrate and bring ourselves into coherence, how to do that both for ourselves individually and for our workplaces. So this is a great opportunity for HR leaders, talent management leaders, senior executives, different individuals in different positions who want to learn about that and kind of go on a journey around that together. And we'll be putting out some more information on that soon. So those are, just a couple of ways to help get you started. And just a reminder for everybody how important it is to pay attention to this issue. It is snowballing. I think that actually globally right now, it's one of our biggest challenges because I think people everywhere are in burnout and don't know it. And so the more that we can take these steps and share our stories together in order to help each other through it, the better our results and outcomes are going to be. So I encourage you to reach out on either or on any of these. You can message any of us on LinkedIn or any of the social media platforms. You can go to Evolving to Exceptional's website and check out these programs. And we are super excited to be trying to help make a difference in these spaces. If you guys have questions or comments or anything after this, or if you catch a recording of this, please do not hesitate to reach out. We love to hear from people, and we really just want to make a big difference in trying to help people to live better lives. Any final thoughts from Dana or Meldina?
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I love it. Remember to personalize this message and ask yourself questions and take simple actions, simple steps, one little baby step at a time.
I echo everything Dana said. I think it's going to be just important for everyone to really take what we talked about today and internalize it and see where you can do a little bit better when it comes to addressing burnout so that you don't get to the negative impacts that we're trying to prevent here. So thank you all for joining us. It was really a pleasure to be able to talk to you guys today.
And have a great rest of your day. And as I like to end everything that I do, just remember to always keep evolving.